This is Defense Domain, your source for strategic insight on global security, defense systems, and geopolitical risk. This is the weekly strategic brief. Week 18 covers the period from May 2 to May 8, 2026. This week reflects a pattern of coercive de-escalation. The United States and Iran advanced diplomatic engagement, even as military confrontation continued in parallel. Naval clashes, retaliatory strikes, and competing maritime control efforts around the Strait of Hormuz demonstrate that diplomacy is functioning as an escalation management tool, rather than a pathway to strategic resolution. Turning to the operational environment, infrastructure warfare continues to consolidate as a central method of conflict. In the Russia-Ukraine war, repeated strikes on refineries, ports, and energy systems show both sides prioritizing economic endurance and operational sustainment over territorial maneuver. Similar dynamics are visible in the Gulf, where maritime access and regional energy infrastructure remain active pressure points. This reflects a broader war model, focused on degrading resilience rather than seizing ground. At the systemic level, alliance structures are under renewed pressure. Uncertainty over United States force posture in Europe, growing NATO rearmament demands, and expanding Indo-Pacific military coordination point to a more conditional security environment, where alliance credibility is increasingly measured by deployable capability and strategic reliability. Turning to the Iran conflict, the ceasefire introduced in April has not produced conflict termination. It has evolved into a managed confrontation architecture. Direct naval clashes occurred near the Strait of Hormuz. The United States carried out retaliatory strikes against Iranian missile, drone, and command infrastructure. Iran accused Washington of violating ceasefire conditions. At the same time, pressure expanded across the Gulf, including renewed escalation involving the United Arab Emirates. Taken together, these developments indicate a militarized de-escalation model, where escalation remains active, but contained, and diplomacy operates alongside coercive signaling. Turning to the Strait of Hormuz, the maritime environment has evolved beyond simple closure or reopening. It is now an active contest over maritime governance. Iran has institutionalized controlled transit. Commercial vessels are now required to coordinate passage with Iranian military authorities. Tehran has also expanded its declared operational control zone. This marks a shift from episodic disruption toward structured choke point governance. At the same time, the United States is expanding pressure beyond naval enforcement. The Treasury has warned commercial shippers that payments to Iran for safe transit, including indirect or charitable mechanisms, could trigger sanctions enforcement. This transforms maritime access into a sanctions-regulated economic battlespace. The strategic implication is clear. Hormuz is no longer simply a contested waterway. It is becoming a test case for competing control models. Access through coercive management, external enforcement through naval and financial pressure, and multinational diplomatic coordination. This week's naval incidents reinforce that reality. Iran seized the ocean koi tanker. The United States launched operations to reopen maritime access. American naval assets intercepted missiles, drones, and destroyed Iranian small boats. European and United Nations-linked diplomatic efforts remained active. The most likely near-term outcome remains limited shipping movement under contested control conditions, with persistent risk of naval incidents and renewed escalation. Turning to the Ukraine war, infrastructure attrition continues to deepen. Ukraine struck Russian energy hubs at Tuapse and Coercive, damaging refining and industrial capacity. Russia intensified drone attacks against Ukrainian ports and Naftogaz energy infrastructure. Both sides are increasingly targeting systems that sustain warfighting capacity, rather than prioritizing direct territorial breakthrough. This reflects a structural transition toward economic endurance warfare. Turning to regional conflict dynamics, Lebanon remains politically blocked. Speaker Nabi Berri rejected negotiations with Israel unless hostilities fully cease. At the same time, Israeli evacuation warnings and Hezbollah activity continue to undermine ceasefire stability. Lebanon remains a contained but unresolved secondary front, closely tied to wider regional escalation. Turning to hybrid threats, European states are beginning to institutionalize hybrid resilience. Italy has established a national crisis response coordination mechanism designed to accelerate responses to cyber attacks, sabotage, energy disruption, and foreign interference. This reflects a structural shift. Hybrid threats are increasingly treated as whole-of-state national security challenges. At the same time, implementation gaps remain. The Netherlands faces potential European penalties after delays in critical infrastructure resilience obligations. This highlights how slow adaptation can itself become a strategic vulnerability. Turning to defense technology and industry, the Pentagon is accelerating artificial intelligence-enabled counter-drone integration. AI-assisted target recognition is being integrated into vehicle-mounted systems, maritime platforms, and eventually infantry weapons. This reflects the operational normalization of low-cost drone threats and the transition of AI-enabled tactical support from experimentation to battlefield integration. Israel is also accelerating force modernization, approving additional F-35I and F-15IA procurement as part of a decade-long modernization effort focused on air superiority, autonomous systems, and long-range strike capacity. At sea, Pakistan has commissioned the first of 8 Chinese-built Hangar-class submarines, expanding undersea deterrence capability, while deepening long-term defense industrial dependence on Beijing. This strengthens China's strategic influence across the Arabian Sea and the wider Indian Ocean. Turning to alliance dynamics, NATO cohesion is facing renewed uncertainty. The Trump administration confirmed plans to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany and shelved deployment of long-range missile systems intended to support deterrence against Russia. This extends beyond force numbers. Strategic enablers and commitment credibility are now in question. Baltic allies are demanding stronger territorial air defense. Following drone incidents near the Russian border, Poland is pressing NATO members to meet the 5% GDP defense spending target by 2030, rather than 2035. This reflects growing eastern flank urgency and widening internal differences over deterrence adaptation. At the same time, Indo-Pacific integration continues to deepen. Japan conducted its first live anti-ship missile firing exercise in the Philippines. Alongside United States, Australian, and Philippine forces, Japan also signed a new defense cooperation agreement with Indonesia. These moves reflect expanding distributed balancing against China. Turning to Europe's strategic posture, France deployed its carrier strike group toward the Red Sea. As discussions continue around a potential multinational Hormuz maritime framework, this suggests growing European willingness to shape maritime security outcomes directly, rather than remain reactive observers. Turning to long-term systemic risk, climate security risks are moving closer to critical thresholds. New research suggests that combined deforestation and warming could push large parts of the Amazon toward irreversible degradation by the 2040s. This would affect biodiversity, rainfall systems, carbon release, and long-term food and water stability. At the same time, new research indicates Antarctic ice shelves may be significantly more vulnerable to ocean warming than previously assessed. Accelerated melt dynamics could increase long-term sea level rise risk, with strategic implications for coastal infrastructure, population centers, and national adaptation planning. From a cross-domain perspective, several structural signals are emerging. Diplomacy is increasingly being used to manage escalation while preserving coercive leverage. Infrastructure attrition is consolidating as a central method of warfare. Alliance cohesion is becoming more transactional and capability-driven. Competing maritime governance models are emerging in strategic waterways, and environmental thresholds are becoming long-term strategic variables. Looking ahead to next week, key developments include the fate of the temporary United States-Iran framework, whether the Strait of Hormuz reopens under competing control arrangements, the risk of renewed military escalation in the Gulf, NATO responses to deterrence uncertainty, continuation of infrastructure attrition in Ukraine, the stability of the Lebanon ceasefire, and European burden-sharing decisions in maritime security. This was the Defense Domain Weekly Strategic Brief. For more in-depth analysis, visit defensedomain.com. Stay informed, stay strategic.